Thanks so much for watching, listening. Oh my goodness, you need to subscribe? Why? How could you not subscribe? This content is astounding, and the jokes, legitimately off the chain. So here's your joke for today. What's the longest word in the English language? The longest word in the English language is the word smiles. Because the first and last letters are a mile apart. Smiles. I know, you're like, that's kind of stupid. I think so too. But of course, obviously next week, we know it's going to be so much better. I say dripping with sarcasm. Let's get on with our series, Trauma Drama. What's trauma? And you know, trauma in our lives can look a lot of different things, look in a lot of different expressions, take a lot of different experiences. And trauma can happen to you like throughout your whole life. It's not just things that you bad things you experienced recently, but it can also happen, you know, from your teen years, from young adult years. It can happen in your childhood, if you're a toddler. There's lots of opportunities for trauma. And so I want us to think about this because Jesus speaks to, and you're like, how on earth did Jesus speak to trauma? And we read about this in the Good Samaritan parable in Luke chapter 10. And we talked about this last week. Jesus was answering a question because the religious leader was trying to justify himself, who's my neighbor? And Jesus answers that question with the parable of the Good Samaritan. So in Luke 10:20, verse 30, it says, Jesus replied and said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among robbers. And they stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. I'm bringing this to your attention because all of these activities are definitions of trauma. Trauma can be a violent attack. It can be abuse. It can be somebody hitting you, verbally abusing you, emotionally abusing you. It can be an aggressive attack. That's what happened to this gentleman. There's a dude walking down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And if you know anything about this road, it's always been filled with bandits, you know, and it took a little while, and it had like lots of blind curves, and it was not uncommon for people to get beat up on this road, and thieves and all that. And so the man was walking, it says and it's interesting because the people who attacked the man in this story, it's not thieves. In the English word, it's thieves, but actually in the Greek, it's not that. If it was thieves, it would be like kleptos, but in the Greek, it's the word lesteo. And that word lesteo not only includes stealing and thievery, but it also includes violence. So there's always in this word the overtone of an attack that's something very violent on a person, against a person. So number one, trauma can be you're the recipient of violence, and violence physically, mentally, emotionally, violence. And then it says they stripped him. That means they took off all of his clothes. This can have the idea and overtone to it of some sexual abuse and not only that, the shame, embarrassment, the appalling, like if you're naked, exposure. And then the third thing, it says they left him. So when you think about trauma can be a result of these one or a combination of all three of these things. It can be the beating, the violence, aggressive against you. It can be sexual abuse, and it can be abandonment. They left him half dead. And you know, I want us to think about that because in our lives, when we think about trauma, if you've ever had experiences with one or all three of those experiences, then you have trauma as a result of that. It can be from abandonment. It can be from sexual abuse. It can be from a violent attack, aggressive. But I appreciate that Jesus speaks to this. And he speaks to this challenge in our lives and what happens. Because if you have experienced trauma, you tend to do one of three things. You fight, you flight, run away, or you freeze. And so if you find yourself kind of having these instinctual reactions to lash back, to fight, to run away, or you freeze in the moment, those are oftentimes, and you may, as we get older and we get more savvy, we can accommodate and we know how to navigate, work around trauma. But if we have one of those three reactions, instinctual behaviors, then there's a good chance that we're responding to trauma. And it could be a current trauma, or it could be a trigger from the past, past trauma that we've had. So my question to you on this is, I want you to think about it. If you experience trauma, what's your main reaction? Do you fight? Are you combative? You kind of get amped up? I have a friend, that's her natural reaction, is just to automatically lash out. She's combative. Do you run away? Like, avoid conflict at all costs? Or do you freeze in it and you just kind of like find yourself, your throat getting constricted? What's your instinctive reaction to trauma? List that in the comments, that would be great. And thank you for subscribing. Next week, we're gonna talk about some healing that can begin and come from trauma that you've maybe recently or in your past experience. So thanks again. Make sure you share this with a friend. It is a fantastic series for us to grow and be set free and healed from struggles that we've had with trauma.